And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We're here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Mondays at 1 a.m. and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for that special edition of Tell Me Your Story. And we stream live at those times at richarddugan.com. The podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. And we're also on YouTube where you can watch these interviews. You know, I received several emails through a gentleman on LinkedIn wanting to help me to boost my ratings, my ranking, my subscribers, all of that stuff. And apparently he hasn't listened to too many of my programs because that's really not the goal of this program. It's not to stack up numbers on social media. It's to get the information out there to the people who are interested in it. And if you know someone who is or who might be, you can certainly pass along the link. richarddugan.com is the website. You can also go to Richard Dugan on YouTube. You can go to SoundCloud and look up the channel Tell Me Your Story. You'll find us, I guarantee you, and then they will as well, and they'll spread the word. And that's how it works. You tell one person, then they tell somebody, and then it just starts to spread, and it starts slow and small. We've only been doing this for a scant 15 years. I mean, you know, it's no big deal. But to our guest, it's I don't want to say it's a big deal for him either. But what is a big deal is changing this world for the better, making a difference while we're here. And I don't know about my guest, but I've experienced a few losses in this year of 2022. I want to welcome to our program here, Mike Younger. He has a website, mikeyounger.com. He's a musician. He's all kinds of things. Mike, welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us today.
Hey, Richard, how are you doing, man?
Doing very well. If you were to list, shall we say, and not necessarily in any particular order, but let's just say the top 5 attributes, if you will, of Mike Younger, and I'm going to throw in the first one, and that being a singer-songwriter. I'll add those two together as one. What else would you? What other attributes would you add to Mike Younger?
Well, I would put band leader in there as well. Although on my upcoming trip to California, I won't have my band with me. I will be coming solo. But band leader and singer-songwriter are different things, so I would definitely, put that one in there. And then I guess I'm a bit of a homesteader as well. You know, me and my girl have a mini farm here north of Nashville, and we raise some livestock and grow some food and stuff like that. And I've learned how to get most of what we need off of these 5 acres. And so that's number 3. Number 4, I would say that I'm somewhat of an environmental agitator.
But in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah.
In a good way. And, I guess that's a big enough thing that it spills over into number 5 too. So.
Well, which would be?
Well, let me think about that for a second.
How about a change agent?
Maybe so.
Because I'd like to think that most of our guests on this program are just that. They're change agents. They want to make a change for the better for everybody, not just make a change to make a change. You know, there's no point in that, right?
Well, I definitely feel that in order to repair some of the damage that our society and our world has sustained over the last X number of years, you could take it in 5-year increments or 20 or 30-year increments, but the damage that we've sustained over the last measurable time has to be addressed, and my particular field of engagement is I have this robotic vacuum cleaner that just clicked on, and he makes a whole bunch of noise. So I had to.
We have all kinds of creatures that like to share this program. We've had dogs and cats and birds, and I say, "Hey, bring them, bring them. It's no problem." So, with your music,
Yes.
would you basically say from those attributes that you mentioned earlier, would you say that that's really where your music is coming from or going to, shall we say, in terms of overall message and mission statement?
Well, I would say that I'm a protege or a continuity of a line of songwriting and a musical tradition that carries with it the examination of topical issues of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, because of that, and in that context, I've written tunes when when the United States invaded Iraq on premises that were later revealed to be false.
Mm-hmm.
That was a moment that my songwriting was applied to the principle of anti-war peace,
Mm-hmm.
the principle of maintaining peace and not engaging in war for profit or whatever our underlying reasoning happened to be on that one. And I know that 9/11 complicated the issue most certainly, but at that time I felt very strongly that Iraq was not the country that attacked us, and that there was some dishonesty being foisted upon the American people to justify the invasion. So I weighed in on that issue with a couple of tunes, on earlier records. And then, as the Obama years unfolded towards the end, the climate change issue, or as a backdrop to that whole chapter of our collective history, climate change was accelerating at immeasurable, actually measurable rates. And part of that, our industries were offering natural gas as a solution to the coal emissions, coal-fired power plants all across the country. It became very fashionable to promote natural gas as the solution because there was less carbon emitted. And the dishonesty and misrepresentation of that principle is that with natural gas, you're releasing methane, which is an even more destructive and dangerous gas into the environment. And that is actually measurable. Methane is a heat trapping gas that's anywhere between 80 and 120 times more efficient at trapping heat in our atmosphere, depending on the atmospheric conditions at any given time. And so once I understood the science behind that, my community here in Nashville was subject to, we all received letters from a certain pipeline operator who was notifying my community that they were going to expand their operation with one of the nation's largest natural gas compressors. With that, an increase in emissions for our area and an increase in pressure on the local pipelines that are in incredibly disheveled and neglected state. Here in Tennessee, we have very lax environmental regulations. It's not the same as California, and these operators are able to endanger communities with unsafe conditions and really have no oversight, or the oversight they do have is of questionable loyalty and integrity, and has not prioritized the public interest or public safety. And more or less, I got a peek behind the curtain of how the whole regulatory process works by photographing and documenting the deteriorated conditions of pipelines in my community in an effort to show that this company shouldn't be allowed to expand their operation when their current operating conditions were below any reasonable person's standards. And just to give it a little visual, if your listeners can picture a 32-inch diameter pipeline built in put in the ground in 1944, that is half in the water and half out of the water. In other words, partially submerged in a creek that kids play in, and no protective measures, pitted corrosion, exposed welds. We get high water events in Tennessee that will carry a dishwasher down the stream. So you can imagine some kind of heavy impact with a pipe that's exposed in the stream is a public safety issue. And when we brought this to the attention here in Tennessee of federal regulators, they dispatched a pair of gentlemen from Atlanta to come view the sites that I had documented. And in the course of that day of field tripping with these feds, it was revealed to me that this agency actually gets the lion's share of its budget from pipeline operators. They get they measure the volume of material passing through these pipelines, and they get a certain portion of that to fund their agency. So the incentive to call out unsafe conditions on any pipeline system in the United States under federal law, there's no incentive. They're cutting directly into their own budget by declaring this pipeline to be unsafe. We need to shut it down. That goes directly against the budgeting for the agencies that oversee the safety of pipelines. And that principle was revealed to me through the course of my engagement in this issue, and it led me to participate and support the Standing Rock effort, which was also resisting new fossil fuel infrastructure at this late stage in the climate change struggle.
Yeah. Mike Younger's my guest here on the program. We're going to be talking about his music and the activism work, if you will, that he does, as well as a lot of other things here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is really a pleasure to have you on the program, Mike. Mike Younger, our guest, MikeYounger.com. And you can go there. We will be linked to your website as well at Tell Me Your Story, so that people can find out more about you, your music, and the work that you are doing. One of the interesting things that I'm able to sort of, and I don't say this with any, I say this with all humility, that I join you as a songwriter. I've only written 2 songs, okay, but I've written 2 songs. One of them I've actually recorded. The other one I'm still looking for the lyric sheet. I wrote it probably in when the heck did I write it? 1993, 94, 95, maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I'm looking for I typed it out on an electric typewriter back then, and I'm looking for that lyric sheet because I want to record it because it has a lot of meaning for me. But I know the challenges that a songwriter goes through. After I wrote specifically my second song that I did record, I began to have, even though I had an appreciation already for musicians and songwriters, I have even greater appreciation. I mean, I'd heard the stories. For example, John Denver wrote one of his songs while riding on a ski lift. He wrote another one on a napkin while he was in Hong Kong, and so forth. And sometimes they just, boom, they just come and you just can't stop it. And other times, I heard one guy, this one, I was working on it for 10 years. Worked on it early on, and then I kind of set it aside, and I got back to it about 9 years later, and I was able to finish it, and then finally recorded it. When you, what is your process, especially considering, I'm sure, what everything that's going on in your own mind about the things that you really care about and the people that you really care about? What is your songwriting or creative process, if I can ask that? That sounds a little pedantic in one sense, like, so who cuts your hair? But I've always found processes to be rather interesting.
Well, of course, each one's different, but for me, oftentimes I will hear a fragment of a melody accompanied by a few words, just kind of penetrating the wall between my subconscious mind and my conscious mind. I don't know where it comes from, I don't know where the lyric and the melody or the beginnings of a melody actually come from. I can speculate on that, but I start hearing something like that and then expanding on it. And before too long, I have a couple of lines that go together and, a basic melody, and that I sit down in an instrument and try and work out a little bit of a melody and, fit in a few more lines that work with that. And before too long, I've got a chorus and start working on the structure of the verse. And it's very construction sort of, it's very similar to like the construction process of a build,
Mm-hmm.
for me.
You ever metaphorically smashed your thumb with a hammer while you were creating? Like, oh no, that's not gonna work.
Well, that's the beautiful part of the creative process is if you have the right environment to work out ideas, you can work through stuff and immediately tell if something is awkward or if it's smooth or if it works or if it's jarring or that's definitely a part of the process is vetting ideas and work and trying them out. And for me, it's finding space where nobody can hear me go through those awkward moments where you're trying out lyrics and melodies that are not keepers. Stuff that doesn't work is just as important as the stuff that does work, because you have to kind of draw it out into the light and hear it to know that it doesn't work, and then cast it aside and move on. And it takes a certain amount of abandon to, in other words, I used to struggle with that when I lived in high density housing in New York and places that had thin walls and you had neighbors right on top of you. It was always sort of, I struggled with the idea that I'm working through these ideas. I don't want anybody necessarily, I would prefer to be working in a vacuum that nobody can hear. And that gives me complete freedom to sound as weird and work out all the awkwardness out of this idea. But when you have paper thin walls and there's people that can hear you, that can sometimes be difficult. So for me, working through those experimental stages in songwriting, I really need to seek out total privacy, and that's not easy. Sometimes when you're traveling and you're in hotel rooms a lot and it's totally anonymous, you can get to where you really don't care what the person in the room next door thinks, and you can work out your ideas, but yeah, there's a lot of that kind of creating the right environment involved with getting to the keys to, or the combination to the lock.
There's a great, I consider it a great song by the late Harry Chapin, and I believe it's how does it's what is it? Hold That D Chord. And this young kid, he's in a motel room, and there's this guy on the other side of the paper thin wall, and he's, playing this song. And this kid's trying to get to sleep because he's got to get up early. And he pounds on the wall and he says, "Hey, I'm trying to get some sleep here." And the guy on the other says, "Hey, I really need to play this, because I'm not singing to remember, son. I'm singing to forget." And it's about this relationship he had with this woman, and they were collaborators creating music, among other things, and he's not with her anymore, or she's not with him, and so on and so forth. And I think about that in terms of like your description of being in a motel room or hotel room, and trying to an idea comes, and they can hear you through the wall. Do you ever get that pound? Have you ever gotten that? Hey, come on, man! I know what you're trying to do, but we need to get some sleep. I mean, I know you're not blacking out, but
I try to be respectful about the time of the day or the volume that I'm doing my thing. Yeah. But there have been a couple of places that there was banging on the walls, and there was a couple others that somebody called they knew that I was they walked by and they saw the room number or whatever and called me, "Hey man, that sounded great. Why don't you come out and play for us all?" And sometimes you just have to be like, "Well, thank you. I appreciate that, but I'm actually working on something,
Yeah.
So you get both sides.
Yeah, Mike Younger's my guest here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we're talking with Mike Younger. MikeYounger.com is the website. We're going to be hearing some of his music throughout this program, so stay with us as we do just that. How many songs have you written that you're aware of? I mean, that you can remember writing?
Well, when I went when I left, when a publishing agreement that I had signed that was active for about up until maybe 2003 or 2004. I think, but at that time I had 80 songs or something like that. And I've been writing pretty steady since then. So I would say at least another 40 or 50 since then. So I don't know
You've
where
got a
that
good
puts
dozen
me.
albums right there.
Yeah, I mean, some of them were made it onto an album, and some of them are just in the catalog and may end up on something somewhere down the road.
I was curious about this aspect because honestly, I have never listened to an album as if I was listening to a book, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. But I'm hearing more and more that artists are actually putting their songs in a particular order. And they want people to listen, and yet at the same time, I'm going, well, I don't listen that way. I mean, I go to Spotify and they just shuffle them around with the artist I'm listening to or what have you. And yet I can remember when I was playing the vinyl that you had to go from track 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Is that something that you have done or something you've thought about doing and saying, folks, you really need to listen to these songs in order because there's a path that I want to take you down, kind of thing?
I definitely put a lot of thought into sequencing, and it evolves as the record is being made. And sometimes I go into it knowing a semi order that I want the sequence to be. But you're making reference to a sort of a branch of the rock and roll family that told stories in their albums, the concept album idea,
Mm-hmm.
there was a bunch of Pink Floyd is the first one that jumps to mind. They made their albums that were from start to finish. It was the unfolding of a story. And I have put together albums with that idea in mind. But I never really kind of pass on any instructions to my listeners as to how they should listen to it. If they should listen to it start to finish or track by track. The way we listen to music, the way, like you just referenced, the digital platforms and the song by song nature of the industry today has transformed that. Very few people listen to a concept album from start to finish. They pick out the tracks they want, and ultimately that translates down to like our musical culture is oriented towards individual tracks. So to go against that and to tell your listeners, to advise your fans that they need to listen to the song in a particular order sort of goes against the current rules of the road, I would think.
Mike, let me ask you about, and maybe this goes without saying or even asking. What, aside from your activism, what are some of the other inspirations? Maybe even the word. What is your muse?
I would say that I don't know if muse is the right word. I'd go back to the word inspiration.
Okay.
I didn't have the traditional. I mean, I don't know what everybody else did, but I managed to finish high school, and I was, kind of at odds with my parents at that point. They were from a real traditional disciplinarian sort of cultures, and I was 17 and becoming a very conscious adult and had to be on my own. So I left home pretty young and with a guitar in one hand and a knapsack in the other, and I hitchhiked all over Canada for a bunch of years and lived in Vancouver and Toronto and then New York and New Orleans, and became a street performer. I mean, I was a street performer while I was still living at home and going to high school, but I realized at that time that I could travel the world this way. I could make my way in the world anywhere I went with my songs and singing if I was smart enough and disciplined enough. And so that journey seemed so easy to me as a kid, and as I got deeper into it, the complexities and difficulties of it, started to dawn on me and pile up, and I didn't have the same kind of stability and security in my life that most people do. That time, I was from when I was 17 until I was about 25. My life sort of descended into the street life, and I became detoured from my musical education, and had to learn how to survive in Canadian cities first. And then when I made the transition to New York, it was a bumpy ride, and I ended up really kind of experiencing homelessness in the United States, in one of the biggest cities, that, if not the biggest city that this country has. And it about swallowed me up. But my point in telling that whole story is that along this journey, I met I met dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of just amazing people, artists, of many different mediums, and people who were non-artists, that were also wonderful people, that were struggling, and that were experiencing this lowest rung of society the same way as I was. And a common sentiment that was expressed to me is something to the effect of, "You got it, kid. You get there. You're doing it for all of us." And in some ways, when I feel discouraged and dejected, and start questioning what the purpose is to carry on and keep going forward and keep pushing and fighting, I think of all the people that I've lost that said something to that effect to me, and I feel semi-obliged to continue to bring my stories and my songs to the public sphere.
Harry Chapin was a great storyteller, and again, another one of his songs about a young kid who basically packs his bags and grabs his guitar, gives his bike to his brother before he leaves, and heads off to look. He actually goes down to the South to look for this old blues man who's going to teach him how to play. And he's, and then of course another one about how write about your feelings, not the things you never did. I've noticed that when a musician or songwriter, singer-songwriter, and one of the artists I'm thinking of is, for example, in our modern days, Adele, who the reason why she was so popular, in my opinion, is not because of the musical notes. It's not because of the way it was produced. It was not because of her appearance or the sound of her voice, which none of this hurt. But it was because she wrote from her heart. She wrote from her happiness, her sadness, her joy, her pain. She wrote from where we all come from.
I'm sorry to interject, when you are being that honest and raw with what's going on, your chances of tapping into something universal that is a part of our collective human experience that other people have experienced in their lives, your chances of actually accessing something universal is much higher when you're being totally and completely honest with what's going on inside your own life and your own head and heart, that authenticity and sincerity is something that people can see and sense. And that's what I think that people really connected to with Adele.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to also ask you, as we continue here, I want to talk about some of the influences, not so much experiences or what have you, but other people, artists and so forth who have influenced you, not specifically songs, but your drive to create. As we continue here with Mike Younger on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and we're talking with Mike Younger, MikeYounger.com, and we encourage you to go to his website, listen to his music. Before I go into the whole who has influenced you, to become the musician you have become, as well as to become the musician you will become in the future, I want to ask you about your genre. And I'm not going to pigeonhole you. What genre or genres, if you will, of music does Mike Younger put out? Or is it just, hey, this is just the sound that Mike Younger makes?
Well, those handles have evolved over the years in the current environment and incarnation of our industry. I would guess that I would fall into the column of Americana, which back in the day was called folk music, but I have an element of rock and roll in my music as well when I'm performing with the band, and even solo. I bring a little rock and roll to the show, even with me and an acoustic guitar. But I am one of those cats that did make the pilgrimage. I grew up in the East Coast of Canada, and as I became more conscious, I grew up on the same stuff that everybody else did, like Led Zeppelin and the Who and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Pink Floyd and all those big bands. But Dylan and the Stones and the Beatles, those when I started digging into what they were listening to and what influenced them, that was when the door kicked open for me, and I became aware of the blues and country and rhythm and blues artists that preceded the rock and roll era. And when I left Canada to come to the United States, my first destination was New York City to see if there were any remnants of the old folk renaissance of the 1960s, if there was anything left of that structure that was sort of a support network for roots music. And then once I'd done a few rounds with New York City and had my backside handed to me, I continued my pilgrimage southward, where I had been turned on to Mississippi John Hurt and Howlin' Wolf and Hank Sr. and just like a long list of musical just wellsprings, towering figures in our musical culture, and they all, I couldn't help but notice a lot of them came from the Deep South. And I left New York for New Orleans and tried to soak up as much rhythm and blues and soul and gospel and all of those musical forms and jazz. I tried to soak up as much of that stuff during my years down there. It was almost like going to college for me, like being exposed to a rich musical culture like that you could take in any day of the week. Was extraordinarily valuable to me. So I would say there are some elements of each of those genres in my stuff. And back in the day, they would call that folk music, right? Or folk rock or whatever like that. And nowadays they call that Americana.
Well, I'll tell you, I actually get a twinge. And of course, you're there in Nashville, Tennessee. And of course, my first thought when I found out where you were from, or where you are now, I should say where you are now, I'm going, it's probably country music. Well, there's a little country flavor in there, but it is not, country western. I actually had to switch from country to classical music listening because the lyrics were starting to bug me. Not that I didn't like the lyrics, but it was like I'm in my head too much. Whereas with classical music, there are no lyrics. It's just the music that still can emote, but it's not directing you in a particular direction, like a song about a guy sitting at a bar drinking a whiskey or a beer, trying to forget the girl, or a guy sitting at the bar drinking a whiskey or a beer, trying to get the girl.
There's a time and a place for each of those types of music, I guess. I feel you on that. There are moments where I want to hear the songwriting, and then there are moments where Chopin and Mozart are good enough for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've got an amazing collection of, believe it or not, of classical CDs. I still have CDs, ladies and gentlemen. I also still have vinyl. Okay. And I had a good friend of mine who, when CDs started coming out, and he would listen to them, I'm never buying another CD again. I will never listen to music from a CD. I will only listen to music from vinyl. And it took me a while to understand why he said that. And it was because with vinyl, you still have that, there's still that tonal quality that I don't care how sophisticated your computer program is, it still doesn't quite get there. And he said the warmth is lost from a needle riding in the groove. And I can appreciate his sentiment at least, because I've been in radio for a long time, and I've gone from tape to CD and digital, now to just, as they call it, file sharing, if you will. And all of that doesn't have the same warmth. But I have a record album. I mean a turntable, two of them actually, and I haven't listened to albums on it yet. But that's one of the things I was mentioning earlier. When you go to listen to an album, a vinyl album, or if you are still listening to analog tape, you listen to the songs in a particular order. So when I am listening to Spotify and I hear, oh, yeah, and then the next song that's coming up is, oh, no, it's not. You expect it to be in order, and it doesn't happen that way in the computer age. In terms of well, let me back that up a little bit. At what age would you say you became a musician, whether it was a songwriter or a singer or a performer, either of the three or all three? At what age did you start that switch was flipped and you were listening to all these different artists and going, yeah, that's what I need to do?
Well, I would say that when I was very fortunate that in my hometown, Halifax, Nova Scotia, they had through the public school system, and I was off. There was an after school program where you could attend some basic guitar lessons and get the beginnings, learn some chords and learn some finger picking patterns and learn how to do a few tunes and all that kind of stuff. And I was very keen on learning how to play. So by 12 and 13, I was taking a couple of classes like that after school. And shortly thereafter, when I started going to high school in the city, I started busing into the city. I was kind of outskirts of town kid, but I started busing into the city for high school. And it wasn't long after that I would take my lunch hours and take the guitar I'd walk down to the downtown public library and set up on their stairs, and I'd play for the lunch crowd that was playing down. I mean, that was, sitting out on the benches and stuff like that. And I started making money, I started earning a few dollars here and there and getting better at my craft. And, of course I wanted to practice all the time. And there was some balancing out to be done with homework and schoolwork and stuff like that. But, it was my passion at the time, and I don't want to be a bad influence on any of your younger listeners out there, but I started cutting classes. I was down there for lunchtime, and it's like I'm making money. I look down in my guitar case, and there's $40 in there, and it's like, oh, but it's time to get to physics class or whatever class, and I better hustle and pack this stuff up and get going and jump on a bus and get back to the school. But there's so many people here. It's such a beautiful day. I don't know that I feel like going back to physics class at all. I mean, I haven't even worked half my way through my repertoire yet, and there's people here that are paying me to keep playing, and that, it led to problems for me. My school administrator, contacted my family and let them know that was happening. And, it contributed to the teenage angst and the breakdown of authority over my adolescence life. But it was a very important step in me taking my music from being private up to being public.
There was a part of the how do we say this? There was a part of the institutions, be they the educational or the family institutions, that was interfering with you being able to have and express your voice, it sounds like.
Well, one day the principal of my high school walked by me. I was in the middle of a song and I just kept playing and hoped that he wouldn't recognize me. And he kept walking.
Yeah,
And then he
right.
went about 20 feet and he did a double take and turned around and he pointed at me and he said, "You're one of my kids." And I said, "I'm Mr. Blank." He said, "You're supposed to be in class." And I said, "Well, I've got a free period, but I am going to be coming back to finish up my classes this afternoon." And he's like, "Well, I'm going to check in on that and make sure that you're there." And well, that put me on his radar, and he became conscious of the fact that I was missing classes. And yeah, I mean, it could be seen from the perspective that you just said, like the institution and the structure that exists for adolescents, school age adolescents, was sort of interfering with my creative development, but at the same time, it contributed to my creative development as well. So it was a give and take, and there was, I mean, I don't want to discourage any listeners out there from going to school and
Right.
doing well and all that stuff, because that's real important too. But that was when I stepped out. The long answer to your question is that it was during that time that I realized that this is the path that I want to take.
Did you consider your administrator's comments to you at that time, with the example you just gave us, less of a rebuke and more of an acknowledgement that you were doing something there? Yeah, I know. Yes, you've got school. You got to get back to class, but it wasn't like, "Hey, knock it off, pack it up, and let's go." I mean, he could have shut you down.
Well,
He didn't.
I want to be respectful of him because he was just doing his job,
Yeah, yeah,
trying to herd all those, like, herding cats, all
yeah.
those all of my peers at that high school. He was responsible for a lot of kids and their education, but he hurt my feelings because when he called my family, he told them I was panhandling downtown,
Oh,
and I had to explain my way out of that. And I was never panhandler, even in my darkest moments. I would play
yeah.
with three strings on my guitar, and I just the begging thing was just a little bit. I wasn't able to. I never felt good about that, so I never did it. Even if I only had three strings on my guitar, I would play for my money, or I'd wash dishes. And I worked a gazillion jobs along the way.
Mike Younger's my guest. MikeYounger.com is the website. We will be linked to it as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and we're here with Mike Younger, and we encourage you to go to his website, MikeYounger.com. And I want to ask you about obviously your school administrator was an influence on you, be it positive or negative, or a combination of both. And again, as you've well stated, being respectful of the fact that he was just doing his job, just like you were kind of, even as a kid, doing your job. Who were some of the people, individuals in your circle, if you will, that made the biggest impression on you? And basically said to you, whether it's directly or otherwise, pursue this, go for it, do it. If this is what's in your heart, if this is your heart's desire to express yourself in this way, don't let anybody stop you.
Well, that's a tough one. I didn't have a lot of encouragement, but I have to acknowledge my sister in that. It was my music was a source of a lot of trouble in our household because my parents really had intended for me to pursue academics and end up being somebody that gets paid a lot of money, and not a musician. And they were hoping that I was going to go to college and all those things. And when it became apparent that my attention span for academics was waning and that my attention was really captivated by music, there was a power struggle, there was an authority struggle, and my sister was the one who always encouraged me and told me that, if you're really feeling this, then don't worry about mom and dad, they'll come around. and you just do what you're going to do, and but do it well, and have the discipline to do it as best you can, and all that stuff. And that was a major support, an early support. And then, along the way, there was pockets of musicians in Toronto and Vancouver that encouraged me along. And when I would say that I had mostly discouraging experiences up until I arrived in New Orleans. I mean, New York was really like a crushing experience for me, like adapting to being like a total street person and living in abandoned buildings with really kind of, a combination, a mix of criminals and crazies and drug addicts, in the abandoned
We could
buildings.
use the term sketchy.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to find my way back to the Greenwich Village folk scene, and here I was lost in the early 90s in New York City, and that was all quite discouraging. I did make some friendships that have lasted and helped me get oriented in New York later in the roots music scene, but it wasn't really until I arrived in New Orleans that I found an environment that was encouraging for me as a young developing musician. In the community of street musicians at that time, when I arrived in 93, it would have been, there were some older street musicians who took an interest in my music and said, "Hey man, when you're done playing today, why don't you come over? I got a stack of records that you need to hear, and get a 12-pack, and we'll just hang out, and I want to play you a bunch of music." And there were Norman Shepherd, was a washboard player in a street band down in New Orleans, and he really, like, I guess he must have been in his 50s or something like that, but he took an interest in me and my talents, and he's the one that turned me on to Hank Sr. and Lefty Frizzell, Howlin' Wolf, Sonny Boy Williamson. I also had a figure like that. Years later, I used to travel from New Orleans I would leave New Orleans in the summers because it was very hot and the tourist dollars sort of dried up. So you were like a seasonal worker, and you travel and you go north in the summer to, where the weather was cooler. And I often would return to New York City, and I didn't like playing underground in the subways. I like to play above ground in the sunshine, or, and it was on the NYU campus. If any of your listeners are familiar with New York, I used to play in Washington Square all the time. And one time I was playing there, and this gentleman, Ben Jennings, who he had a bad leg, and he couldn't get around so well easy, but somehow for some reason he had wandered all the way from 14th Street and 8th Avenue, which is a long haul, down to Washington Square Park, still, West Side Greenwich Village area, but he had walked a long distance, which was unlike him. I didn't know him yet at the time, but because of his leg, I know that it was unlikely for him to travel that distance. And he just, by some sheer coincidence, happened to walk past me as I was playing in the park, and he hung out and listened, and then struck up some conversation, told me he had been living in New Orleans in 63 and 64 in a little flop house with Jerry Jeff Walker when Jerry Jeff wrote that song, Mr. Bojangles, and Jerry Jeff had been playing in the same doorways that I had been playing, for the last number of years. And his story went from, empty apartment with a futon on the floor to, when he wrote Bojangles, his life transformed in a very, sudden, he went from rags to riches. He was that story, but he was a street musician. And Ben was telling me this story, and he's like, he became another person that not only encouraged me and acknowledged that my talent was noticeable, but he also had, all these stories from the 60s and 70s and his experiences around musicians and rock stars like Jerry Jeff, and he had a great record collection that he turned me on to all kinds of amazing stuff. I mean, he was the one that played the Ike and Tina River Deep Mountain High record for me, which was like I don't know. It was, that one hit me like a ton of bricks. It made me realize that, this sound didn't come out of the thin air. It percolated, the sound of rock and roll and the Beatles, and that didn't just happen out of nowhere. It was a tradition that was carried on from rhythm and blues traditions of the 1950s. I mean, one musical influence led me to the next piece of the puzzle, and then that opened the channel to the next few pieces of the puzzle, and gradually I sort of put together my understanding of the American musical journey.
We're talking with Mike Younger, and we are certainly hopeful that you will go to his website, mikeyounger.com. You'll find out about his music, the work that he's doing. How many albums do you have out right now? I don't know if we still call them albums or not. Compilations of
I have put six releases out.
Okay.
The first one was with a label, and the rest of them have been independent.
Okay. And we encourage you to go there. Can people get those compilations, if you will, or releases through your website?
Yes.
All right. We encourage folks to go to mikeyounger.com as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And, it's interesting. The more you talk about yourself and the people who have influenced you and the experiences that you have had, the more songs of one of my favorite artists, Harry Chapin, come up in my mind. Because there's another song where he starts out as this young kid who just happens to come across a guitar, and he wants to learn to play and to sing and all this kind of stuff. And I love what Jack Benny said years ago. He says, you have to practice even to be bad. Harry, he's there up on stage. I'm listening to the live version, and he is strumming through the notes as if I were strumming through the notes, because I don't know how to play the guitar. Okay? It's horrible. And of course, it gets better and better. He says, yeah, if I could just have a drum to help me keep the beat, and then in the background some strings that would come along to make it sound so neat, and this and that and the other thing. And he would get better and better as the chorus went along, and then he would tell verses about people who, like his girlfriend said as he was playing, he was playing a love song for her. He says, I need to find a bar and get a drink, because he is just so bad. And his music teacher basically took a sabbatical, or was it a reprieve, because of this particular character's playing. And other songs about songwriters and singers and young kids who want to go off and learn to play the blues, for example, or what have you. And it's just amazing, these stories that you're telling me, that I'm remembering these songs from this particular artist. Do you find that, have you ever found a song that you have written, or maybe that you're working on? Oh, that's already been said. No, I'll crumple it up, throw it away. No, someone's already done that. Have you ever come across that where, someone else has already done that?
Yeah, I mean, in the songwriting process, just out of respect, you try to make sure that your lyric or your melody isn't plagiarized. There's always that process, there's always like, and sometimes it manifests in this form, like you're like, really, you're hearing this melody, you're hearing a lyric that's going with it, and you're like, man, where did this come from? Because they manifest out of thin air, like I said earlier. And you're like, I hope that's not something I heard recently, and I just don't remember having heard it, and then you build a song around it and hope it's not somebody else's. And most of the time when that happens, it is an original idea, you know what I mean? But everything in folk music and in our musical culture is a derivative of the things that came before it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is innovation, and there is groundbreaking new, stylistic things happening where new ground is being broken. But as far as like forms, that stuff is mostly set in place and derivative of the early traditions in Celtic music and in the blues and you know, in the earliest forms of our music, and all of folk music is sort of derived from that. So as an extension of that tradition, I don't sweat it too much, you know, like at the same, as much as I try not to like have it air in any idea that's too close to somebody else's idea and therefore unoriginal. There's also a component of folk music tradition where certain melodies and certain usage of certain words or language, or you know, the rhythms, the polyphonic rhythms and stuff like that, they relate to and are derivative of a tradition. And you can't, I mean, if you go to too many lengths to erase that,
Yeah, you
then
have
you're really
silence.
yeah, you're really like undercutting your own foundation, or you know,
Yeah.
musical roots.
And to me, that's part of the problem when I hear, and again, I songwriters and singers, musicians and so forth, they deserve to be compensated for the work that they do. By the same token, everything that you've just said, songs don't come out of a vacuum. They come out of what we have heard in our past. You haven't heard all the music there is to hear on the planet. So how do you know that Billy Foster over in Greenland wrote a song that has a riff that is sounding an awful lot like a riff that you've got in your song, and now he wants to sue you for copyright infringements? Like, I don't even know who you are. I've never even heard your music. And to me, this is part of the problem in terms of that whole issue of specifically in the music industry.
Well, I don't know Billy Foster, but I'm just hoping he's not.
I don't know that there is.
He's not one of these
litigious.
I hope he's not one of these litigious songwriters that you run into from time to time. That's all I can say about that guy.
But do you see where I'm going with this? It's like, you know, where does this stop? Because I'm influenced. Even my song that I have written and produced might have some elements because of the influences of the people like John Denver and Harry Chapin and Dan Fogelberg and even Jean-Luc Ponty and some of the other artists that I listened to as a kid growing up, and some of the music that my parents, and Marty Robbins, for example, that my dad introduced me to. And there was a folk group, he had an album, and I've been looking everywhere for it. The album was actually called Hootenanny, and it was folk music. And I still remember that genre. And my mother, I think she loved Lena Horne, you know, yeah. and I know that they listened to Frank and Dean Martin and many of these other artists. And it's like, I'm influenced by all of these people. And so how do I make sure that every note that I put on the paper is mine and not theirs? Because, you know, I mean, you got to draw the line somewhere.
I mean, you leave that up to the litigating attorneys to decide where the line is, where, you know, plagiarism starts and the end. You know, you've reached the end of the folk tradition and you've entered into plagiarism territory. I mean,
that's
you know, knock on wood. I've never been through that, but you know, George Harrison went through it, and Robert Plant and Jimmy Page are going through that. You know, so I mean. It usually only afflicts those who have, you know, major success. When you get there on that level, then you've got all kinds of new people making claims, and in some cases those claims are legitimate. But you know, I'm been very encouraged to hear that some of my heroes in music who have been called out on that. You know, the Stones is one band, and you know, when there is an outstanding claim, they generally are very respectful and loving of the blues community that gave them their foundations, and they go to great lengths to make sure that those people are compensated fairly, you know what I mean? When there is such a claim, you know, I don't think that it's always, well, you know, good luck getting through my wall of attorneys. Sometimes these artists really have not forgotten where they came from, and they remember and hold in high regard the musical traditions they come from, and feel like they should spread the wealth a little bit, you know, when they get called out on it.
You know, and that's an interesting point that you bring up, because many of the artists that you have mentioned, bands and solo artists, I've seen a lot of interviews with a lot of different musicians, and I don't want to say a majority of them, but many of them will credit their early days of singing in the church.
Well,
And
yeah.
that it's church music that really started the influence, and sometimes you will really hear that in some of their releases. How about you? Was the church at all an influence for you?
Well, I was raised Catholic. Both my folks were of the Catholic tradition, but they were engineers. They were science minds, and we
Mm.
were pretty humble household. And uh, I wouldn't say that we were agnostic, but we were in sort of in the undisciplined Catholic column. We didn't go on Sundays. We celebrated the big holidays and stuff, and the values, of doing unto others, and
Hmm.
the basic underpinnings of the values that are transferred in the Catholic tradition. But as far as being card carrying members of the community and attending church and singing, and that was not something that my family got us into. Like, we had the option to take Bible study and stuff like that, and it just wasn't my thing,
Yeah.
as a kid. And I really enjoy singing. I enjoyed singing in choir when I was in high school. It was an important part of the music program. I think it was 30% of our mark was your choir performance and attendance. So I did get some choral singing in my early roots, but it was not through the church. But I gotta add that most of the music that I gravitated to, the rhythm and blues and soul music and the gospel,
Hmm.
all emerged from the church. I mean, all those sounds came from even the blues stuff. When you go back to people, traveling dudes like Reverend Gary Davis and stuff like that, like the blues tradition is also it's not in the major scale like most of the gospel stuff, but it is a branch of that the
Yeah.
spirituals, that all of that music is based on.
And I think there are some people today, maybe the millennial generation, who don't know that I guess they still call him this, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, actually put out some gospel albums, because that was also part of his upbringing and how he was influenced as well. I mean, in many of the interviews and interactions that were recorded of him, not music but conversations, the man was always in his younger days, he was always respectful. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. That kind of thing. And I mean, I was born and raised Catholic too. You know, and I am no longer. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I still hold the rituals and the traditions and the ceremonies that I experienced as a kid growing up. I still hold those near and dear to my heart. Those are kinds of things that we need more in our daily lives, is ritual and tradition and ceremony on those special occasions, whether they be anniversaries or birthdays or graduation days or whatever the significant days are that come up in our lives. And it leads me to one other question I want to ask you in regards to this. Your music, your performing, how does it serve you? How does it feed your soul? What does it do for Mike Younger? Because we know what Mike Younger does for the audience, for the listener.
Well, I guess the most clear and concise way that I can answer that question is this. I've seen some ups and downs, and I've been discouraged, and to the point where I was giving up hope on music, and I was at that stage in my life that a lot of musicians end up at coming to. What am I going to do from here? What's my plan B? How am I going to keep going? How am I going to make ends meet? It doesn't look like I'm going to be playing stadiums, and I haven't been successful at securing a record contract. I don't have hit songs on the radio, all that stuff. I've had my moments of being very discouraged, and my story is compounded by the fact that I did get a chance to record with my heroes. Levon Helm and Spooner Oldham and David Hood are all on my current release, Burning the Big Top Down. And although those tracking sessions happened in 2001, really early in my journey of transitioning from a street musician to a recording artist, this was a formative experience for me. And how does that relate to the question you asked me again? Goodness gracious, can you repeat that question?
How does the music,
what does it do for me?
What does it do for you?
So as I very in my wordy way I try to explain, I have seen some ups and downs, and my downs were that I recorded with my heroes, and no sooner had that happened than the possession of the tapes and the possibility that music might see the light of day and be released to the public was swept off the table, and those tapes were lost for almost 20 years. It was crushing, and I had to continue. I had to go on and produce, continue producing work as if it had never happened. And I started to lose hope, and my light was getting dimmer, and I was looking at plan B, and I was fixing cars. And there's something gratifying about being able to fix somebody's car and give it back to them and turn it around for, a quarter of the money they would have paid at the dealership. I liked that. That was gratifying, instant gratification. Hey, Mike, you can do something useful. I felt good about it. Mm-hmm. But the further I went down that road, the further I realized how I was abandoning a part of me that I had cultivated from a very young age. And that part of me was really struggling with the idea of now being abandoned. There was a part of me that hungered to be performing, that hungered to be part of that creative process. And when the opportunity came around for me to reclaim the record that I had lost in 2001, and I got my hands on that record, and I started working to complete it, adding background vocals, horns, doing some editing on some of the songwriting, and then launching it in 2001. It sort of opened this. The whole inertia behind that process reminded me of how much of a sense of purpose music gives me. When my life is about music, I have a sense of purpose. And when you take that away from me, when you take music away from me, I am one lost individual, and I have no sense of purpose. I can languish and take comfort in bad things. I'm subject to the same sort of temptations and diversions as anybody else to kill the pain and take my mind off of what's hurting me, and music. My entire journey from being a hitchhiker to a squatter, a homeless guy to street musician and all that stuff, I always, as a young kid, the mantra that I would come back to is stay close to the music, Mike. As long as you stay close to the music, things are going to be all right. You drift too far away from the music, I can't guarantee, that this is the voice in my head saying, just stay close to the music. Don't drift too far away from that. Because there's all kinds of ways to drift away from music when you're a street person. Mm-hmm. And I held true to that. I stayed close to the music and made that the central part of my journey for many, many years until my career ambitions were crushed by, this experience of losing this record. And I had to pick up the pieces after that. And I started to lose that discipline of staying close to the music. And I started thinking about plan B too much, and I wasn't happy. And it took me a couple of years of doing plan B and really transforming my life to be about fixing cars and farming and stuff like that, which was all good. All those things are good. I'm not knocking them. Any mechanics or farmers out there, hats off to you, my friend. I know how hard you work because I've done it. But my soul was crying out to get back on track with music that whole time. And finally, when I got my hands on this record that I lost 20 years before, I was like, okay, my soul is telling me to go, to hit the gas, to change lanes and get over here in the music lane and hit the gas. And that's sort of what I've been doing.
And so you did find, after 20 years, you found those songs again, those tapes.
Yeah.
And that's what this latest album is. Is that right? This latest release?
Yeah. I mean, over the years, Levon passed away, and then Jim Dickinson, the producer, passed away. And then Jack Holder, the owner of the studio where we worked, he passed away. And I got, my heart progressively broke knowing we weren't going to get to listen back together, and me and Levon, who we made friends in that session, and we kept in touch for a number of years after. And I always assured him that I wouldn't rest until I got the loose ends and the unresolved issues around the record taken care of. And I had to eat those words for a long time, but eventually I got that record back because when Jack Holder died, I got a notification on my social media that the studio was going to be closing, and I knew they had the vault at the studio, the temperature and humidity controlled vault where they were holding all these tapes. And so I dropped everything that I was doing, and I was like, this is my last chance to make an interception on these tapes and get my possession on them. And I was very fortunate enough to be able to locate Jack Holder's partner, and I was able to find her and give her a call on telephone and say, Miss Hopkins, you might not remember me, but 20 years ago I recorded with Levon Helm and Jim Dickinson and a whole crew of rhythm and blues and rock OGs in your place. And it was, the record label collapsed and the whole thing was a disaster in the end, but I'm here to try and get those tapes and put them out and share them with the world. And my intention is to take care of all the unresolved issues around these tapes, because the record label went down quick and they did not take care of business. Which was horribly humiliating for me to be working with my heroes and have them treated in a way that I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Yeah.
But during COVID, when I reclaimed the record in 2017, Miss Hopkins, of course, said, yes, of course, I remember that session. I remember you. I thought for sure sooner or later I would hear from you, and it's good to hear from you. And yeah, we can get these tapes. I know exactly where your tapes are. I'll get them back to you. Make sure you got a green light from Luther Dickinson, who heads up the North Mississippi All-Stars. He was Jim Dickinson's son. Jim was the producer. Yeah. So I needed to get a green light from Luther, and I called him up and he gave me the green light. And I got those tapes, and over the course of COVID, I went back, and with the help of Dave Pomeroy here, he's the president of our local musicians union here in Nashville. With his help, I went around to all the families involved in that record, and we managed to come to terms, and I was able to get the record into a good karmic place for release, and got the blessings of all those people, which I'm very proud of.
Just out of curiosity, from a technical standpoint, is this 1-inch or 2-inch tape? 2-inch tape. And were you able to find in 2017 a multi-track recorder that these could play on?
I absolutely was able to. Some friends of mine, Larry Hansen, who plays keys with the Righteous Brothers today. I think that it's one of the original members, but at any rate, Larry Hansen he plays keys with lots of people, not just the Righteous Brothers. He owns a studio here in town, and a couple of young engineers that I know work out of there, and Chad Brown, who helped me finish this. He's the co-producer on this record. He had access to all that equipment and, like 24-track 2-inch tape, and we threw those.
Oh. What a thrill that was to listen to them again. I use this phrase in one of my ads, listen to them again for the first time.
Yes, indeed.
Oh,
yeah, it was quite a journey. We had to dehydrate, or what do they call it? We had to bake the tapes just to be certain that there was no excess humidity that I had collected in them. And I took them to Ray Kennedy here in town, who your listeners might know from his production prowess with Steve Earle and Lucinda Williams and lots of other artists. Well, Ray is a pro at taking tapes that have been sitting somewhere for 20 years and and running them through a process to where they don't get ruined when you put them up on the machine and stuff. And I was very fortunate to be able to go to him and have his help on that.
I think the only experience I've had at that, and I've done some archival work of my own, it's been 1/4-inch tape, of course. A gentleman came in with a box full of 5-inch reels. He wanted them all put together. Each one of them was like, 15 minutes long, and he wanted to make them into 30-minute tapes. And I strung the first one up, and I started playing it, and it just squeaked. Squeaked. And so I had to do some research. And we're going back to the late 80s, early 90s. And what I found out was I got a can of silicone spray that would not damage the machine nor the tapes, but it would coat the tape enough so that at least I could transfer the audio to cassette, because that's what we had at that time, for the 30-minute programs that he wanted. And I was able to produce those programs. It was arduous, but I got to tell you, it was a blast. And I actually miss the days of the metal splicing block, which I still have, the white china marker, which I still have, the splicing tape, which I still have, and the reel-to-reels, which I still have, and about 20 boxes of reel-to-reels that I've collected from those early days.
Wow.
There are days I miss all that. It was nowadays it's all digital, but back then, boy, it was literally hands.
I mean, that's the stuff of legend, Richard. Guys my age, we just hear about that they used to do that. When there was editing and when
happy to tell you stories from the bygone days of radio.
I mean, it's legendary stuff, when they talk about back in the time of, take your pick, the Stones or the Beatles or whatever, when those guys were starting out and they didn't have the fancy digital editing equipment that you do now. And sometimes tape needed to be cut and spliced. That is the stuff of legends to guys that grew up in the digital age,
Oh, I got to tell you that, and it's really funny too, because, today when you cut and paste and you got to delete a section, when you delete it, for the most part, it's gone, unless, of course, your editing software has an undo feature. And I use Adobe Audition, and you can go back 10 or 20 or 30. But back then with reel-to-reel, and we had one of those ones that would tilt on a pivot, okay?
Oh, yeah.
And so we'd have it horizontal, and you couldn't use a chair. You literally had to kneel in front of this machine, which is probably how I ruined my knees. And as I would splice out sections, I wouldn't just toss them in the garbage. I would gently, carefully place them up on top of the meters up above in case I needed to put it back, or maybe I cut it too tight or too loose or what have you. I mean, and sometimes the splices, and I would not put splicing tape over splicing tape over splicing tape, because that would it wouldn't run right through the machine. It'd be too thick. So I would actually, if I didn't do it right the first time, I would take off the old splicing tape and I would put that piece back in there and I'd splice it back in there and then I'd measure it and cut a little more. And
whoa.
It was so much fun. I never got that proficient using cassette, but I could repair cassette tapes. If I could take them apart, take the screws out, take all of the hardware out from the inside, take the spools out, and then put it on the splicing block, and then at least somehow flatten out the wrinkled portion, or if I could keep it, I would. And or splice it with splicing tape and then trim the tape, because the tape was always too wide. It was for 1/4 inch, not 1/8 inch, I guess is what cassette was. It was a marvelous time. And I don't know how many people know how to wind what they called carts. If you've ever seen an 8-track, these were carts that they use in a radio, and it was a continuous loop. But it only had 3 tracks, left and right, and then the tone track. And when you hit the record button and start recording, it put the tone on there so that when it came back around, it knew where to stop. And I used to wind those. I would wind 30-second, 60-second carts, 10-minute carts with these were big, like 5 or 7 inch reels, but they were in big square plastic boxes. I mean, those were the days of radio, and maybe one of these days, I hope I took some pictures from some of these stations back then. But it was a great time.
I must say that
great time.
the sound quality of cassette technology was, I grew up on that. That's my era, like a cassette deck where you could, if you heard something on the radio, you'd slap a blank in there and press record, and that's how you'd record it off the radio. I mean, that's how I put together my earliest, listening compilation tapes when I was a kid. And I just think that the sound quality of tape, the analog quality, it takes you back to like,
oh yeah,
LPs and studio tape, and I know that there was as soon as CDs came around, well, it was a transition, right? What was it? DAT. It went from cassette to DAT, and then, or I don't know, and then it jumped to CD.
Yeah.
And when it jumped to CD, and it was like the cassettes are over, man.
Yeah.
Like, now they're like they're vintage antique pieces, but I've still got a pile of them, and I have a car with a tape deck in the dashboard, and it sounds pretty dang good to me when I'm driving.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a DAT player recorder at home too, as well as a digital disc recorder at home, and those were the small discs in a plastic box. Right. I could open a museum, I guess. Who knows? Maybe I'll.
Yeah, with the tape, with the splicing equipment you have. I mean, there's some people that that have been in the music business all their life and never seen that stuff. So I mean, you could open a museum.
Well, I know that on LinkedIn there's a radio broadcast group, and I just popped in there one day when they were talking about the celebration of the 100th anniversary back in early October, the 100th anniversary of the first commercial on radio back in 1922. I also worked in Phoenix for a radio station that celebrated its 100th birthday this year. And I have to tell you what, I did not know that it had started in 1922. And I got to tell you, when I read that, I'm going, oh my God, and I'm part of that history too. Whether I'm written down anywhere, I know I was there for a few years doing what I was doing, and it's nice to be a part of that as well.
Awesome.
So, great stories that can be told. Mike Younger is my guest. We're getting a little nostalgic here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Mike Younger, I can't tell you how much fun I've had, especially these last few minutes with you, reminiscing a little bit. Maybe one of these days I'll just have to spend some time just sharing a couple of my own stories from the bygone days. And it's funny, too, because in my mind and my heart, I'm 17 years old. My body is 62. And yet that still sounds weird in my ear. So, I'm sorry, did you say 62? I don't know what that is, kind of thing. And it's weird to look back and say, oh my God, I've been in this business for over 43 years. Are you kidding me? Wow. And I've had those moments like you, as you described earlier in the program, where I drifted away from radio for a year or two. And I got to get back. I can't, this is what I love doing. And I know you love performing, creating, making music for people to listen to hear the message. And we encourage people to go to your website, mikeyounger.com, which we will be linked to, as I've said before. And I have 3 final questions that I ask all of my guests. Right. Now, you may have answered these questions throughout the program, but I like to ask the questions directly. Before I do, however, to keep you in suspense, Mike, I need to talk to you, the listener and the viewer, and let you know that you are listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We're here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., streaming live.
I lost your audio.
Can listen to where you can listen to and watch those interviews, and we can also be found through PayPal. If you'd like to support the work that we're doing, we would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much for whatever you can do. Just put my email address in when you're sending, richard@richarddugan.com. Any amount is welcome. Hey, we'll take energetic support as well. We can use all of the help that we can get on all levels. We also ask you to participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision. Perfect vision means that you go within and listen to that still small voice. Just as you did, Mike, when that voice was saying, you got to get back to the music. That was your still small voice telling you. And each of you needs to listen to that still small voice and follow the promptings. It gets easier and easier the more you do it, to where you don't have to ask the questions. You don't have to necessarily pause. It just comes. And in my life, it's just been coming. And I can still say to this day that I feel as though I've been in the right place at the right time throughout most all of my life. With all of that being said, let me ask those three final questions of you, Mike, that I ask all of my guests. The first of those is, who is Mike Younger?
Who is Mike Younger? Well, he's this tall, lanky dude from the North Country who's gotten a fair way down the road from where he started from, and he has remarkable conviction and devotion to making his time on this earth count. And by that, I mean, he wants to be counted among those who are working towards solutions. And there's a million different ways you can work towards solutions, but as a songwriter, you're in communications and you're communicating ideas. And with the tumultuous time that we've all collectively experienced over the last, I don't know, it's hard to tell when it started and when it ended, or, like we're still in it. I feel like the voices that are speaking up on social justice issues and environmental issues, and people that are sticking their neck out to stand for something, as opposed to being a cookie cutter that says a whole lot of nothing. That is what our culture needs right now. Like the commercial side of our culture has led to a constant supply of bubble gum that really says very little of anything that's of import. And our art form, my art form, at one time carried with it a spectrum of ideas that rocked our entire culture and moved us forward. And I feel like we are all collectively living through a time that is, ideas and solutions need to be discussed, need to be out there in the public sphere. We need to be having dialogue, and we need to bring some of our fellow citizens who feel like they've been left behind and are real angry enough to kick in the door and take what they want, all that stuff. We need to bring them back to the table and make them understand that we're their countrymen, and we want them to be happy also, and keep our family, our national family, together in a cohesive way and a healthy way, where our people aren't being exploited and left behind for dead, and they're being provided opportunities that can lead to better outcomes, in all communities. I mean, these are the ideas that I try to carry forward in my music, and I think that it's vitally important that other artists do it. And I know that some are, and I encourage all of the rest of them to.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you are doing now?
I guess in part, I would like to go forward knowing that I did the best that I could and did my part in the time that I had here to create space for the type of dialogues that lead to change, positive change. I would like to think that my music had some small role in change for the better.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
Well, I wish I knew what that was. My purpose, the purpose that I referred to earlier, my sense of purpose that the music gives me is intertwined with this idea of utilizing the platform for something greater than just yourself. Like I would love to get rich and famous, and who wouldn't? But there's something much more important happening in the exchange of music and communications, and that is, to create the inclusivity that really puts into practice what we preach as a society. We claim to be a open, inclusive society, and we come up short in a lot of ways. We still do. We're still struggling with the legacy of the very turbulent times that our nation has come through. And I guess, the purpose that I feel behind my music is to hold the line on certain ideas about human rights and about, when I see young people like Greta Thunberg being attacked on all sides for just being a young person trying to ask and push the issue with the adults, like the adults haven't solved this energy question that's going to kill us all, and here, like, we are still building pipelines and compressor stations and digging in deeper into this energy paradigm that we already know, our scientists have known for 50 years, is going to lead to chaos and destruction for our coastal cities first, and for many other at-risk human situations are going to be affected by this in a very negative way. And so when I see people coming after a young voice like Greta Thunberg for standing up for this principle that I am aligned with too, I see it. I see how insane it is that we as a society are publicly shoveling tens of billions of dollars in subsidies at an industry that refuses and is actively fighting at every level of policy to prevent a transition into clean energy in the United States. But I see people that have a vested interest in that industry attacking a young kid who's looking down the road and seeing like there might be no future for me and my kids at all if this doesn't change. But I see that somebody like that subject to attack, I feel obligated to show up and to support the point of view that I am aligned with, which I agree with Greta. It's time to stop investing and throwing money into this one form of energy that we know is putting our entire human experiment at risk. And it's time to take those resources and start reinvesting them and reinvesting in people. And there's plenty of people in the fossil fuel industry that are engineers and pipe fitters and welders, and there's plenty of work for that type of skill set in the new energy paradigm. Only they've been persuaded by the big financial interests behind fossil fuels that their livelihood is at stake, and they should fight with every breath that they have to maintain public subsidies and investment in fossil fuels. And that's just one issue, right? It's one that I'm really interested in. It's one that I've devoted a lot of time to because it is like the overarching backdrop issue that's happening behind the invasion of Ukraine, behind the extremist right, incursion into our Capitol buildings with Confederate flags. The backdrop to all of that stuff is that our planet is transforming because we lack the capacity and vision as a financially interested society. There's money to be made in oil and gas, so let's keep going. Why would we want to change it? Why would this money to be made? Well, if the ecosystems and the natural world starts to come unraveled because it can no longer keep itself cool and keep the ice frozen at the poles, and the oceans start rising, and then we start having killer storms on coasts, and towns in the middle of Tennessee get washed away and sweeping 35 of the citizens away. What good is what good is the money and the profit making when you could take all of those loyal employees, hardworking people, pipe fitters, welders, and all them, and put them to work within a solution, no longer an extractive industry that's hurting the planet, but put them to work in the construction and the building of the new energy paradigm. And, oh, it'll take too long. We don't have time for that, blah, 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 blah. Well, they must have missed the chapter of American history where this country mobilized from one coast to the other behind, getting our industry, the gears of industry turning fast enough, turn out as many battleships and destroyers and jet planes and everything else that are required to beat fascism in the 40s. We did that overnight. I mean, not overnight, but we did it in very short order. We did it in a matter of years. We were able to mobilize our entire society behind that effort because it was an existential effort to crush fascism in its cradle, right? Mm-hmm. And so I see a lot of parallels. And when people tell me that America can't do it, I say, no, that's not true. America can do it. We just need to figure out how to get our big financial interests at the top of the food chain to see the profitability in the transition to clean energy and the futility of trying to, futility is not even the right word. They can stretch out the fossil fuel era another 50 years, but by then it'll be too late to do anything. It's not futility, it's just reckless. It's reckless. And, we could all keep our heads down and go about our daily business and let them figure it out, and we'll go over the cliff together. Or people like Greta Thunberg show up, and people like me show up, and people like you show up.
Yeah. Well, Mike Younger, I want to thank you so much for not only your expressions, but also for your participation in this program, in this conversation. And I hope we get a chance to do this again soon, especially when you come to the West Coast, and maybe we can sit down face to face and have a chat as well.
I love that, Richard. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
And I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And we hope that you will join us again next time for our broadcast, podcast, videocast. Until then, love to Lal and Jeanette. I am listening.